Richard Branson there. Well, let's broaden this conversation. Chris Roebuck has joined us, professor at Cass Business School. One of our more recent emailers has written in with the headline, "You couldn't make it up." And looking at that list of politicians, including Lord Miners, the former city minister, lining up to throw bricks at Barclays right now, how have they got the cheek?
I think it's absolutely staggering. Yes, what happened at Barclays was unfortunate and it shouldn't have happened, but the ability of the British political classes to ramp up what was a problem into a potential disaster is absolutely staggering. Just as an example, let me read an email that came in to me from a friend of mine who is a director of a global organisation, lives abroad, works abroad. "The constant statements by British politicians that the UK banking system is effectively corrupt has done more to harm the reputation of your banking industry here than the original problem at Barclays. Other banks are involved in other countries, but you don't see their governments demonising their own banking system." What can you say?
Well, you can say if they're guilty, they need to suffer the consequences. You could say we could increase penalties on anybody who works in the financial services industry or in a company who does things wrong. There is an ethical problem, isn't there, in the way that business is practiced in the financial services sector today?
Well, we have to be clear about this, and this is one of the things that has caused problems. The politicians have quite clearly been saying that the entire British banking industry is effectively full of people who don't have any ethics and who are potentially corrupt. And what that has meant is A, the public has increasingly lost confidence in its own banking industry. B, the people in banking, the hundreds and thousands of people who work in banking, who are working with professionalism, with integrity and ethically day in, day out over their careers, are getting extremely upset by the attitude of the banks. And what's happening as a result of that is we've effectively got a situation where, okay, maybe across the world a couple of hundred people in 20 banks were involved in this, but this government here is demonising everybody who works in this particular sector and giving the impression that effectively it has no confidence in its own financial centre in the city. Yes, there are ethical problems, but there are ethical problems in any number of businesses. If we look at recent events in relation to, for example, drug companies attempting to sell products to under 18-year-olds that were only licensed to 18-year-olds. If we look at most of the major corporate disasters over the last 10 years, all of those came because somebody either didn't do something they should have done, Gulf of Mexico, Bhopal, etc., or did something they shouldn't have done, the whole financial crisis. So it's about the ability of chief executives in organisations to get the message down their organisation. What is right and what is wrong? These are the values of this company. If you step over the line, you're out, and if you commit a criminal offence, you're in jail.
Just to come back in on that, though, this is a different industry, isn't it? It deals with money. So it is easier, in a sense, to perform an action that is wrong or inappropriate because you're dealing with money, and you have a great deal of responsibility for fair practice and fair dealings. And clearly AIG, JP Morgan, Lehman Brothers, Bear Stearns, you can tick off the list. A disproportionate amount of problems have been found in the financial services industry since the global financial crisis.
Yes, I think that's fair.
You can point the finger at other industries.
Oh, certainly.
But over the last 4 years, they've been falling like ninepins.
Yes.
There is a problem.
And there is a problem in terms of, I think, what's happened was effectively the deregulation and the cultural change that occurred not just within the city, but within all financial institutions to some degree throughout the traditional, highly ethical, integrity-driven approach that existed in the old world of the city, dictum meum pactum, my word is my bond, etc., etc., where no one would have ever dreamt of doing anything that was unethical. But the drive to produce the bottom line effectively meant we moved from making money in an ethical way to making money in any way.
But Chris, shouldn't you point the finger at the regulators, the BBA and the BOE in particular? Because let's put the bankers aside. We know they're greedy, right? We know they're short-termism. So the regulators, they're the ones who should be responsible. But the markets division of the BOE certainly wasn't doing its job.
Yes, you can say the regulators have a duty, but in the final analysis, as a professional business person, you have a duty to act ethically. One of the key problems about regulation is, let's be fair, you cannot regulate people into acting with integrity. You can regulate them to stop them misbehaving, but that doesn't mean they're going to act with integrity. And that's the whole issue about reputational risk. Yes, you can throw them in jail if they break the law, but that doesn't stop them doing things that harm the reputation of their organisation, because those things are still legal.
We saw a whole host of politicians queuing up to get their faces in front of the cameras to tell us exactly what they thought of Bob Diamond. What do you think it says about the state of UK politics that so many of them are just focused on this issue?
Well, not to be uncharitable to politicians, that some people might, say they would sell their own grandmothers, and to some degree that they're as bad as some of the worst elements of bankers. But what happened quite clearly over the last couple of days, it revealed that there is an unfinished political agenda between the British political classes and the banking system, and I think there is also an unfinished, in some cases sadly, personal agenda between certain people and Bob Diamond. Let's face it, Bob is a slightly, dare I say it, in-your-face American investment banker who doesn't back down. As we all know, having worked in global organisations, that culture does not necessarily sit well in certain groups in London, and it might sit even worse in certain groups in maybe Switzerland or whatever. But in New York, it's perfectly acceptable. Now, okay, you can criticise maybe us for not having cultural sensitivity in terms of the way Bob Diamond works, and Bob Diamond not being necessarily particularly culturally sensitive about some of the people he was dealing with in UK. But that doesn't necessarily mean that you should go to the point where, as you said earlier, we're almost getting into a witch hunt situation.
John Paul from Los Angeles writes in this morning, and thanks for getting up for us on your July 4th Independence Day. Don't blame US banks. Look into your own backyard before trying to blame others. We opened the show this morning with me asking Simon whether London has a regulatory problem and whether this is indicative of a failure in the UK financial services industry to catch the culprits. Is that right?
In many cases, I'm not convinced that this is about catching the culprit. I think we go back to that core issue related to leadership and the example that is set in organisations by the people at the top. Irrespective of banking or whatever sector, we know quite clearly from all the evidence that people lower down the organisation will mirror the behaviour at the people at the top because they think it's going to get them promoted. As a result of that, if you have people at the top who keep banging on about money is important, you need to do this, what's going to happen is people are going to follow that example. Now, people are saying the banks are out of control, they have no integrity. We all know that if you go into any global bank, within the appraisal process, there is always something that says, does this person conform to the values of the bank? Do they earn the money in line with the values of the bank? And that's been in most global banks for many years. The problem is that too many people who are in management positions, when it comes to the appraisal, if the money's there but it hasn't been delivered within the values of the bank, say, oh, well, don't worry about it too much, this is just a slightly unimportant thing. That's where things have gone wrong on the day-to-day interaction between line managers and their people. Absolutely clear evidence. We know that an individual's decision to either act with integrity or not, or their decision to give high performance, is 80% controlled by the influence of their line manager and their line manager's day-to-day behaviour. And it's about leadership top to bottom as well as at the top.
Yes or no, should Bob Diamond's £20 million in bonuses and salary be forfeited?
If he was in New York, no one would complain. Now he's in London, everyone will complain.
Chris, we're going to wrap it there. Thanks very much for being with us this morning. Chris Roebuck, Professor at the Cass Business School. Simon, you're going to stay with us, so we'll come back to you with some currency questions.